A moonlit canopy where the Asanbosam waits, iron teeth catching starlight above the sleeping village. In the green, wet heart of the Akan forests there is a hush that predates the rain, the low, patient listening of trees that have grown through generations of stories. Villagers in the shade of those trees will tell you the forest can breathe and remember, that it keeps the shapes of old dangers as clearly as it keeps the roots of rainfall en route. Among those shapes is the Asanbosam, a creature with iron teeth and a temperament older than fear itself. It is not the scentless, romantic bloodsucker of Western tale, it is a thing built from canopy and bark, an ambush that lives in branches and waits above the world of tracks and fields. To the Akan it was a lesson and a caution. The forest is not merely a place of wood and fruit but a realm that watches and can answer. This retelling seeks to walk the path between dusk and dawn where the Asanbosam lives and to show what it meant to the people who named it. Here you will find, in detailed scenes and layered memory, how the creature shaped nightly rituals, how villagers used fire, iron, and song to keep their children safe, and how the myth survives in modern towns where tractors hum and the old trees still stand. By listening to elders' voices, tracing the scent lines of cocoa and yam fields, and following the canopy's shadow, we can learn why an iron-toothed shape that drops like a storm from the branches became part of the Akan map of danger, and why that map still helps us read forests today. Origins, shape, and the language of the canopy. The first stories of the Asanbosam carry the voice of people who walked between cleared fields and wild forest without the certainty of maps. Elders would point at the crown of a kapok or an old silk cotton and say, "Look how the branches make rooms. Listen, the leaves are full of speech." In that speech the Asanbosam lived, a name given to an ambush that rises from leaf litter and footfall. It is described as a being with iron teeth, hair coarse like liana, and limbs long enough to swing between branches without touching trunk. Flesh is part shadow, part bark, the mouth is the most shocking feature, a row of forged teeth, sometimes said to be two pairs, bright and cramped as if made by a blacksmith who knew how to bite. That iron became the central symbol of the creature, teeth that catch nails, that show the human need to explain why some wounds are not made by animals known to villagers. The Asanbosam watches the village edge from the canopy, iron teeth glint where branches make shadow. Myth makers do not invent details at random. In a landscape thick with both natural predators and human menace, snakes, leopards, thieves from far bush, the Asanbosam explains an unaccountable pain or a child lost to the creak and give of a branch at night. It is useful to believe in a force that will take you up into the trees rather than just down into the soil. Folk wisdom attaches a shape to anomalies, the scratch on a wrist, the echo of a night cry, footsteps on a path that vanish once dawn comes. The iron-toothed image may have roots in ritual acts. Iron is a metal of transition and protection. Blacksmiths and toolmakers were sometimes thought to wage small wars against spirits by shaping iron into knives, adzes, and bells. Their craft was rumored to cut invisible threads and to attract or repel beings whose teeth were already forged of metal in the stories. The Asanbosam's behavior is precise in oral retellings. It waits on branches above trails where people pass alone. It drops, sometimes smokes of dust and fungus rising where it landed, and it leaves marks, bite marks that the elders read like weather patterns. But the myth is not just about fright. For villagers the legend taught practices. Fields were cleared and paths kept wide at night, fires were tended and children returned to the compound before the moon rose high. A farmer might hang an iron bell or a sheath of prayer scraps in the doorway to confuse the senses of the canopy watcher. Mothers would sing loud songs at dusk, a ritual doubling is both lullaby and deterrent. The song confuses the would-be predator that seeks a silent heart. Thus the Asanbosam is both creature and pedagogy, a way to move bodies and shape routines so that people survive the real risks the forest contains. Yet the creature is not always an enemy, sometimes it is a boundary marker. Stories told at the edge of a hamlet will say, "Do not go into that part of the forest." The Asanbosam keeps the old boundary. Where the forest is deep and the trees ancient, the spirit of the Asanbosam keeps the wild from spilling into the ordered domesticity of maize and yam. That mutual respect, humans leaving places to the canopy and the canopy leaving human spaces to humans, is part of a larger cosmology. The forest is older than any one village, and to call a place haunted by the iron-toothed watcher is to recognize a limit that keeps both worlds intelligible. When traders and travelers came to these settlements, they carried their own names for the creature, and the Asanbosam took on new details. Coastal merchants, who had seen big cats and heard tales of far-off sorceries, folded those images into the tree spirit. Christian missionaries, with their catechisms, translated it into moral lessons, respect the night and fear temptations that lift you from your community. Anthropologists, when they later recorded the legend, framed it in scholarship, an archetype of ambush predators, a cautionary tale, or a symbol of social boundaries. But at its heart the Asanbosam remains an Akan story, not a universal monster, but an entity framed by the particular interplay of iron, canopy, and the daily rhythms of village life. To imagine the Asanbosam is to imagine time measured in seasons and in the slow fall of leaves. The teeth are iron because iron is what humans use to hold the world together, the adze that hews a canoe, the blade that harvests yams. That the creature's teeth are forged is a poetic way of saying, danger is not just wildness, it is a force shaped by culture as much as by nature. The forest and its watchers carved the habits of the people who lived beside them, and the people, in turn, forged objects and rites intended to survive those watchers. The story is ecological in practice as well as in spirit. Keep the paths clear, respect fallow groves, call your children home early, hang iron where the night is thick. The Asanbosam, then, is an agent in the conversation between human life and forest life, a caution that keeps both worlds alive. Encounters, rituals, and modern echoes. Encounters with the Asanbosam occupy a particular place in oral account, they are never casual. The creature is associated with the hush before rain, the sound of a branch snapping when no one there can explain it, or a sudden absence, a child who leaves to fetch water and whose sandals are later found at the base of an old tree. When such events occur, elders convene a meeting under the porch, the trustees of memory bringing together those who remember other similar losses. The telling begins with specifics, time, weather, the last meal eaten, and moves into ritual. The village will sometimes fast, or the clan leader will consult an elder tongued in the older languages for a direction, who was offended, what offering must be made, what talismans must be hung. The Asanbosam is not only an explanation for predation but a reminder of the interconnected obligations between humans, forest, and spirit. A nighttime household ritual, iron bells and braided talismans hung to confuse and repel canopy watchers. In many versions, the remedy invokes iron and noise. Bells, metal bands, and smoothed machetes are leaned against the thresholds of compounds, hung among rafters, are hammered into hollow tree trunks in playful but serious kits intended to confuse anything that listens from above. The belief maps itself into everyday craft. Blacksmiths, whose furnace smoke smells of change, were asked to fashion small iron trinkets specifically to repel canopy dwellers. Women who weave nets and ropes braid certain grasses and place knots in the pattern of the clan's mark as a protective sigil. All of these practices reinforce the social fabric. The safety of any person is the responsibility of a circle of neighbors who keep watch and share the tools of defense. In that sense, the legend of Asanbosam is also a story about community vigilance. But not all signals succeed. There are accounts of the Asanbosam as a moral mirror. When individuals stray from customary obligations, leave a widow unvisited, waste a grove, or practice forbidden forms of witchcraft, the Asanbosam is said to take notice. Those tales enforce social norms by marrying the spiritual to the practical. To be said to have angered the Asanbosam is sometimes the same as being accused of shaking the community's sense of balance. The verdict is not always punishment alone, the rituals that follow demand atonement and social restoration. A sacrifice might be made at an old tree, or a cleansing performed involving water from 3 streams, the offender may be required to repair a fence, redistribute grain, or help with harvest until they have earned their place back in the circle of reciprocity. The Asanbosam also occupies modern imagination. In towns where electricity hums and motorcycles thread the streets, the old trees remain, and the stories persist in altered form. Urban storytellers will tell of a figure on a rooftop or a shadow on an overpass. Some artists reinterpret the iron teeth as a metaphor for extractive industries that bite into the land. Contemporary writers have folded the Asanbosam into tales of environmental justice. When logging companies fell a grove, the rumor goes, the canopy's watchers became restless. Activists use the figure as a symbol of resistance, the iron-toothed watcher that keeps an eye on greed. In films and comics, the Asanbosam becomes both horror icon and environmental messenger, its visage serving as a compact symbol that speaks to old fears and new political anxieties. The legend proves stubborn, able to hold new meanings without losing its original function as a guide to safe behavior. Scientists and ethnographers who study human-wildlife conflict can read the Asanbosam in another register, as a cultural mechanism to reduce risk. By telling stories that conflate unknown night dangers with a named being, communities create rules that limit exposure. Curfews, keeping children near the compound, lighting specific paths, and maintaining guard patterns are strategies rooted in local knowledge and given emotional force by mythic language. Those stories are efficient. They compress risk management into memorable narratives and rituals that children can learn quickly. Where formal conservation measures fail to reach remote communities, these telling practices have often preserved biodiversity indirectly, because the taboo around certain groves or hunting times has kept species habitats relatively stable. Even skeptics find something magnetic in the Asanbosam's image. Tour guides in forest reserves sometimes tell the story to travelers as a cultural framing before a canopy walk. They describe the creak of buttress roots and the sudden wind that moves only the leaves. That performance is not purely entertainment. It is a way of transferring local environmental literacy to visitors who might otherwise leave rutted tracks through fragile soil. Where markets and tourism change the use of forest land, the tale offers continuity, a language to say, this place matters and must be treated with care. The Asanbosam, imagined vividly with iron teeth and the patience of trees, thereby becomes part of a modern archive, recorded in travelogues, in school curricula that teach local heritage, and in the imaginations of those who decide the fate of the land. Finally, the Asanbosam endures because it refuses to be simplified. It is predator and guardian, moral judge and ecological teacher. The iron-toothed spectator of the canopy stands at an intersection where human practice meets deep time. When you listen to the old tales, you hear more than a monster. You hear the rhythm of living with a large, living forest, the kinds of compromises that kept people in wildness tolerably safe, and the inventiveness of communities that turned danger into instruction. That is why the story travels across generations and why it is still told when the moon rises above new roofs and the old trees lift their limbs like arguments waiting to be settled.